Hello everyone, welcome to the e-learning program initiated by Sri Gyanamurthy Vidyapeeth for the students of Standard 8. Good to see you once again in today's social science lecture for semester 1. Well, we are going to continue our discussion about chapter number 4, how the traders became rulers, which we initiated in the last lecture. Before we continue our discussion, take some more information, add to our knowledge and be more acknowledged about the topic. It is always important to take a quick recapitulation of what we have learned in the earlier class. Therefore, as a part of recapitulation, I would like to discuss with you with the help of some images. So have a look at your screen. You can see in the image the administrative plans of Wellesley, which we discussed earlier. Wellesley, who came as a Governor General in 1798, wanted to achieve his political aims. Wellesley relied on three methods, namely, that is the system of subsidiary alliance, outright wars, means having a straight war with those who did not accept the subsidiary alliance policy. So he directly fought with those states who were not ready to accept the subsidiary alliance, even by convincing them. So forcibly he had outright wars, and defeating them in wars, he acquired their territory, their property, and expanded the British rule. The third method he used was assumptions of the territories of previously subordinated rulers. So he took away the territories of previously subordinated rulers, the rulers who were previously ruling on them and who did not have any more people to rule. The doctrine or the documentation of subsidiary alliance was introduced by Lord Wellesley. Under the subsidiary alliance system, the ruler of the allying Indian state was compelled to accept the permanent stationing of a British officer within his territory and to pay a subsidy for its maintenance. So these were the administrative plans of Wellesley. Further, you can see we learned about the subsidiary alliance in the last lecture. So there are a couple of things to understand about subsidiary alliance as a recapitulation. So have a careful look and read it very carefully. In reality, by signing a subsidiary alliance, an Indian state virtually signed away these few things. So, if a king, if a ruler accepted Lord Wellesley's, the Britishers' subsidiary alliance policy, then he would be actually giving away its independence, isn't it? They were not free to have war also. They were not free to have negotiations also. There were a number of restrictions that were made. Therefore, its independence was completely lost. The right of self-defense, if someone attacks them, they were not even allowed to protect themselves. It was the British who would decide how and when to protect them. The plans would be made by them. Therefore, the right of self-defense was also lost if the Indian states, the rulers, signed the subsidiary alliance. Although this was done forcibly, maintaining the diplomatic relations, the negotiations, isn't it? Ruler to ruler have diplomatic relations between them. They negotiate. Employing foreign experts. So they were not even allowed to employ higher foreign experts for the betterment of their ruling or for the upgradation of their territory or their state or their kingdom. So they were not able to employ any foreign expert in their court. So this was also one of the conditions of the subsidiary alliance policy, which was unjust. Settling its disputes with its neighbors. If the kingdom had any dispute with another neighboring kingdom, they are not allowed to settle that dispute also without the British government's permission. This was also unjust and unfair clause or the point in the subsidiary alliance. Well, and many rulers accepted this, as we learned in the last lecture when we were reading the passages. As a consequence, as a result, consequence means as a result of the subsidiary alliance, what happened? Lakhs of soldiers and officers were deprived of their hereditary livelihood, spreading misery and degradation in the country. So in the entire country, what happened? They were deprived of their hereditary livelihood. It means whatever work they were doing from year to year, generation after generation, hereditary. Say if the soldiers, father, mother or their ancestors were doing some work, they were involved into some business or some work. So they lost that because now they had joined the British army. So they were not allowed to do that. Spreading misery, and everywhere there was misery, poverty, poor. People became poor and degradation in the country. So the economic condition of the people living at that time, that is the subjects living under the rule of the king. It is the responsibility of the ruler, the king, to look into the prosperity of his subjects. But due to the subsidiary alliance, what happened? They were not allowed to interfere into that. Well, many of the unemployed soldiers joined the roaming bands of Pindaris, which were to ravage the whole of India during the first 2 decades of the 19th century. The subsidiary alliance system was, on the other hand, extremely advantageous also to the British. They could now maintain a large army at the cost of the Indian states. So it was the Indian rulers who were paying for every little penny they spent on the soldiers, on the maintenance of the army. And who was getting benefited? The British were getting benefited. It was their soldiers. They worked according to their commands. But who was paying for that? The Indian people. The Indian soldiers were paying for that. So it was very, very extremely advantageous to the British. Lord Wellesley signed his first subsidiary treaty with Nizam of Hyderabad in 1798, as we learned earlier. The Nizam was to dismiss his French trained troops and to maintain a subsidiary force of 6 battalions at a cost of 241,710 pounds per year. Imagine the cost at that given point of time. We're not talking about today's current situation. 241,710 pounds per year the Nizam had to spend in order to maintain the 6 British battalions. And he had to dismiss his French trained troops. He had already spent a lot on French soldiers that he had with him. He had to dismiss them. He was not able to take the services of those soldiers whom he had already trained. So that was a great loss to the Nizam. The British guaranteed his state against Maratha encroachments. So in return, what the Nizam would be getting? That the Maratha would not harm the Nizam. That was the promise given by him. But then all promises were fake. So he guaranteed that his state against Maratha encroachment, any kind of interference or any kind of war waged by the Marathas. In 1800, the subsidiary force was decreased, and in lieu of cash payment, the Nizam ceded part of his territories to the company. So that was another thing another development was there. That in 1800s, the subsidiary force was decreased, and in payment of cash, the Nizam ceded part of his territory to the company, gave his territory to the company. The Nawab of Awadh was also forced to sign a subsidiary treaty in 1801, and in return for a larger subsidiary force. The Nawab was forced to surrender to the British nearly half of his kingdom, consisting of Rohilkhand and the territory lying between the rivers Ganga and Yamuna. The delta regions were handed over to the Britishers. So now you can see how much of wealth the Britishers had acquired. Wellesley dealt with Mysore, Carnatic, Tanjore and Surat even more sternly, even more strictly. Tipu of Mysore would of course never agree to subsidiary treaty. On the contrary, he had never reconciled himself to the loss of half of his territory. In 1791, he worked incessantly to strengthen his forces for the inevitable struggle with the British. So he kept on struggling with the British. He never gave up. He always had fights with him. Tipu Sultan entered into negotiations for an alliance with revolutionary France. He sent missions to Afghanistan, Arabia, Turkey to forge an anti-British alliance. So he wanted to bring an anti-British alliance. Therefore, he was in talks with the people of France. He was negotiating with them so that he could drive away the Britishers, the British alliance over here. So anti-British alliance was being planned by Tipu Sultan. Lord Wellesley was no less determined to bring Tipu to heels. So Lord Wellesley was also very adamant. He was also very arrogant. At any cost, he wanted to make Tipu agree to the subsidiary alliance. So he was no less. He was determined, steadfast to bring Tipu to heels. So bring Tipu to heels means bring him to his condition, bring him down, and to prevent any possibility of the French re-entering India. So they had already driven away the French from India, isn't it? They had defeated British already. So he did not wanted the French to come back to India at any cost. The British army attacked and defeated Tipu in a brief but fierce war in 1799 before French could reach him. Before French help could reach him. So before French came and helped Tipu, the Britishers had already defeated Tipu Sultan in this war in 1799. Tipu still refused to beg for peace or humiliating terms. He proudly declared that it was better to die like a soldier than to live a miserable dependent on the infidels. In the list of their pensioned Rajas and Nawabs, Tipu met a hero's death, a hero's end on 4th May 1799 while defending his capital, Seringapatam. His army remained loyal to him to the very end, unlike Sirajuddaullah's commander-in-chief. Nearly half of Tipu's dominions were divided between British and their ally. So, after having won Hyderabad, after having won Tipu's Mysore, its territory was divided between British and the British allies. The reduced kingdom of Mysore was restored to the descendants of the original Rajas from whom Hyder Ali had seized power. A special treaty of subsidiary alliance was imposed on the new Raja, by which the Governor General was authorized to take over the administration of the state in the case of necessity. So you see, till Tipu Sultan was alive, subsidiary was not imposed on Hyderabad, on Mysore. So after the death of Tipu, this was applied. A special treaty was made and imposed on the new Raja who was being made the Governor General, by which the Governor General was authorized to take over the administration of the state. Well, an important result of the 4th Anglo-Mysore War was the complete elimination of the French. It means, and there was no threat to the British supremacy in India. British were now not afraid of the French anymore. Although Tipu Sultan tried to bring the French back into the country, but he failed. In 1801, Lord Wellesley forced a new treaty upon the puppet Nawab of Carnatic, compelling him to cede his kingdom to the company in return for a handsome pension. So he said, I will be giving you pension, I will give you money as long as you live for all your expenses. So he had to hand over his company or his kingdom to the company. The Madras Presidency as it existed till 1947 was created by attaching the Carnatic to the territories seized from Mysore and Malabar. The territories of the rulers of Tanjore and Surat were taken over and their rulers pensioned off. The Marathas were the only major Indian power left outside the sphere of the British control. Wellesley now turned his attention towards them and began aggressive interference in their internal affairs. Well, after the recapitulation, let us now see what are we going to understand in today's lecture. So in today's lecture, as you can see, I have put up the 3 points that we are going to cover in today's lecture, that is expansion of the British rule in India, Dalhousie's policy of annexation, and the dissatisfaction of people. These are the 3 topics that is visually we are going to look into 4.3 given to us in our material, 4.4 and 4.5 respectively. So have your materials in your hand and open to page number 35 where you will find the passage to read, and I'll try to explain. The expansion of the British rule in India. Well, let's understand the title. What is this? Were the Britishers not expanding? Yes, they were expanding by the way of subsidiary alliance. But after having implemented the subsidiary alliance and bringing some of the states right from the south, because as we know that Hyderabad, then we learned about Mysore. Mysore is a southern state, is it? Is the southern part of the country. So beginning from the southern part of the country, Britishers started climbing all the way up to the center and then going up to the north. So let us read and find out. After finalizing the subsidiary alliance treaties with Mysore, that is one of the southern states, Nizam of Hyderabad, and Maratha chieftains. So after having finalized the subsidiary alliance, so these states came into the clutches of the Britishers, the southern states, the central states, isn't it? So the British moved towards the northern part of India. Now they were eyeing upon, they wanted to capture the entire country. They wanted to have the rule in the entire country. Therefore gradually now they were looking forward to go to the northern part of the country. They wanted to capture those regions as well. So let us see what happened then. They entered into a treaty of friendship with Nepal. So they signed a treaty with Nepal at that time. Sensing a threat from it, they thought that Nepal could be dangerous for the existence or for the future of the British Empire in India. Therefore, cleverly, in a very clever movement or in a clever move we can say, they signed a treaty with Nepal so that they can never harm them. They became friends with them. So a kind of friendship treaty was signed with Nepal, sensing a threat from it. They fought many battles to secure the frontiers. They fought many battles. Friendly relations with the Sikh king Maharaja Ranjit Singh helped them to win the battle with the Afghans and establish their rule in the Sindh. So what did the Britishers do? They signed a treaty with the people of Nepal, the country of Nepal, and further they fought many battles, keeping the Sikh king Maharaja Ranjit Singh, who was ruling the Sindh part, the part of Punjab over there. So with the help of the Ranjit Singh, they happened to win the battles and they fought the Afghanistan people, and established their rule in Sindh over there. The British had an ambition to capture the Sikh kingdom also, isn't it? They have got this dirty thoughts in mind, isn't it? It is not that if they are friends, they are real friends. They are only friends in disguise. They are not real friends. That is what they did by applying the subsidiary alliance policy. It looked very appealing to the people, but later on when they realized it was a slow poison. Similarly, here also they played the trick. The British had an ambition. So they had the desire to capture the Sikh kingdom also, which was very powerful kingdom, but they could not do so as long as Maharaja Ranjit Singh was alive. So to fulfill this dream, to live this dream, it was not possible because Maharaja Ranjit Singh was the hindrance, was the obstacle for them, and they knew very well that till the time Maharaja Ranjit Singh was alive, it was not possible to capture the entire of Sindh and bring it into the control of the British. Well, so they just kept friendly relationships with Maharaja Ranjit Singh as long as he lived. The King Ranjit Singh was a strong ruler of that time. So he was a strong ruler of that particular area or the northern region. He had set up strong army with the help of European officers for protection of his state. Just like Tipu Sultan wanted to had the French soldiers, isn't it? Trained French troop he had, which he had to then give away, isn't it? The Nizam had to give away his French troops because of the subsidiary alliance. So Nizam had to dismiss them. Nizam of Hyderabad had to dismiss. Similarly, over here, Maharaja Ranjit Singh had soldiers. He had European officers for the protection of his state, so that nobody could harm his state or his kingdom. He had attained victories over many nearby states. So Maharaja Ranjit Singh had acquired some nearby states by winning over it. After his death, so you see, now Maharaja Ranjit Singh is dead. After his death, Punjab suffered anarchy. So Punjab suffered anarchy. Who would be the next heir to the throne? So after Ranjit Singh's death, Punjab suffered anarchy. Governor General Sir Henry Hardinge came to India and brought Sikh rule completely under the British rule with the policy of interference and annexation. So your new policy is being utilized over here. So we'll be talking about the policy of annexation soon. So due to the policy of annexation, another policy that we're going to learn today, on the basis of this policy, he brought Sikh rule completely under the rule of the British government, and that is how Sindh or Punjab came into the hands of the British with the help of the interference and annexation policy. Well, think question is given to you, so try to answer this question. Why did the British establish their rule first in Bengal? Well, you can say Bengal was a great hub for trade, isn't it? And it would be easy for them to rule from there because it was the sea coast over there. Easily they would come and go, take their things from there. Therefore, it would be easy for them to rule. Well, why was it essential for the British to conquer Sikh and Afghan territories? Another question, think about it. How could the British establish their rule all over India despite of having a small army? Well, I'll try to discuss this with you a little later, so you can think meanwhile. Well, next we have the Dalhousie's policy of annexation. So after having read this annexation policy, you will be able to understand on what pretext did the rule of Punjab or the state of Punjab came into the hands of the British. So let's understand this new policy. Just like we learned about the subsidiary alliance policy, one of the main policies introduced by Lord Wellesley. Dalhousie's policy of annexation, as the name itself suggests, Dalhousie, it is one of the British officers named Dalhousie. Like we had Wellesley's, isn't it, policy of expansion, and he introduced the subsidiary alliance policy. Dalhousie's policy of annexation by his name. The aim of Wellesley's policy of expansion was to enslave the native kingdoms without using much of the British resources. If the British would have used all his manpower, his ammunitions, weapons, they must have brought under few states, isn't it? But he used his brains. So without using much of the British resources, that is the army, the artillery, the weapons, without having to enter into any kind of fight, simply the policy worked out. So with the help of the policy, Wellesley's policy of expansion, that is subsidiary alliance policy, they enslaved many kingdoms. They made them slaves. They became the dependents on them. Well, the states that accepted the subsidiary alliance considered the British as their friends, isn't it? British were their friends. But those who did not accept were enemies. Eventually, in the absence of the internal and external threat, they became irresponsible and their administration started deteriorating. So now what happened? Once the subsidiary alliance was accepted by a ruler, the ruler became very, very careless. He was involved into all his recreation and luxurious activities, singing, dancing, making merry. So he did not pay attention to his kingdom and the internal and external matters of his kingdom. Therefore, the kingdom's rule or the king's rule came or deteriorated in a way. That is what is being told to us, isn't it? Eventually, in the absence of the internal and external threat, because now there was no more threat. When the Britishers are saying that we are giving you protection, you don't have to worry about it. Only thing you have to maintain the expenses of our army of maintaining, and you have to just keep one of the thing and certain other rules that we learned, the points that we learned. Therefore, the ruler became completely relaxed. As a result, what happened? The king became irresponsible towards his own administration, and the administration started deteriorating. Well, the outcome of the conspiracy of the British was the anarchy in many princely states. So, with the help of the anarchy system, most of the states or some of the states were taken into the control by the British. The outcome of the conspiracy of the British. This was a conspiracy that the British were playing with the Indian rulers. The British was the anarchy in many princely states. So the single rule came into problem, isn't it? Well, the Indian rulers got trapped in it. The Indian rulers became victims of it. As a result, the British got an excuse to start interfering into the internal matters. Now what happened? Because the ruler was not ruling his kingdom properly. The people, the subjects were facing problems. Therefore, Britishers got a chance. You are not able to administrate your own very kingdom properly. Therefore, being a part of the subsidiary alliance, now we are going to look into the matters of your internal matters of your state. So you see how cleverly they got into the internal matters of the kingdom. First of all, they compelled them to take the subsidiary alliance, made the king, made the ruler relaxed, and put them into all kind of recreational activities, and therefore the administration of his state started declining, started deteriorating. And giving this reason, this vague reason that the king is inefficient of ruling his administration, is inefficient in his administration, the king is not able to rule his kingdom well. On this pretext, they started interfering into the internal matters now. So you see how cleverly they intruded into the kingdom's internal affairs. The British got an excuse to start interfering into the internal affairs of the states, and on the pretext of putting an end to the anarchy. And therefore, what did it say? Now the anarchy comes to an end. After this king, the descendants would not be made the king. We would be ruling. We would be administrating the kingdom. And that is how they took away the kingdom from them. Once the king dies, there would be nobody else who would be put on the throne now. The anarchy would come to an end. Well, the Indian rulers got trapped in it. They annexed many states under the same excuse, giving the same excuse that the ruler is inefficient of administrating his kingdom. They annexed the territory or the kingdom. Thereafter, Burma, which is now called Myanmar, and the regions of Punjab were also annexed. Forcibly they took it away, giving this reason that they are not able to control or administer the state properly. If the king died without a son, now for example, the king had a son, but the administration was not running properly, or the son was not running the administration properly, then they would be taken away. But if the son is not present, if the king does not have any heir to the throne, there is nobody to look after the king dies, then what will happen? On this ground also, on this pretext also, they annexed the territory, the kingdom. Therefore, this was also one of the reasons of annexation, forcibly taking away the kingdom and putting it into the control of the British rule. Automatically, it became a part of the British kingdom, the British India, what you say. If the king died without a son, his state was annexed, was taken away. Nobody else was there who could run the state now. In this way, states like Satara, Jhansi, Nagpur, etc., some more names are there, I'll be sharing with you, became the victims of the policy of annexation. So, annexation was the fate of a number of states. A number of states became victims to this policy. Well, Dalhousie aimed at helping the British traders to make huge profits from the trade of tea, coffee and cotton by capturing the areas that produce these commodities on a large scale. So, where did he annex? Most of the regions that he annexed on the pretext of either the son is not present or the ruler is not able to rule properly. On the basis of that, most of the places that he captured or he took away was in order to make or those regions where it was profitable, where tea, coffee and cotton grew in abundance. And by selling this, who would be profited? The British would be profited. Now they don't have to buy from these states because the entire state is in their custody now, in their control. So no more they have to buy from the producers over there. The entire region is in their hand now. So directly they can take the produce, and without paying any money or in tax to anyone, directly they can sell these things in their country and prosper their country. So Dalhousie aimed in a way to help the British traders to make huge profits from the trade of tea and coffee by capturing their areas producing these commodities on a large scale. So whichever areas produce these things in a large scale were annexed in one or the other pretext. To consolidate the British rule in India and to run the administration smoothly, many changes were introduced by Dalhousie. Dalhousie brought about many changes in order to make the British administration smooth. The British administration was now expanding on a large scale, isn't it? A number of people to be taken care of in different states, right from south to extending all the way up to north in India. Therefore, it was becoming difficult for them to administrate or control their own working. Therefore, in order to make it smooth or smooth functioning of the administration, Dalhousie brought about many changes. Well, you can see Lord Dalhousie's image in your material given to you. During his tenure, the first railway line was created between Mumbai and Thane. So it was during Lord Dalhousie's time that we got our railways. The Indian Railways Foundation was laid. This was the first train that ran in Mumbai, from Mumbai to Thane in 1853. This is a date that you should acknowledge and remember, memorize this date. The image of the first railway is also given to you. So this was one of the reformations, one of the changes that Dalhousie brought about in our country not for the betterment of the Indian people. It was not for the Indian people, but for the smooth functioning of the administration of the British. They wanted to transport goods from one place to another. They wanted to commute their soldiers from one place to another, and for that they required some mass transportation, isn't it? So railways was introduced in our country. Railway line was set up. This helped Britishers to run their administration smooth, but in a way it was help to us. Well, these were some changes. What the first change he brought about? We'll read some more changes. The modern postal system, the post system that we enjoy today, isn't it? The postal department, post what we call, is also a gift of the Britishers that we have got. The modern postal system started in India, and the wireless system between India and England too. So wireless system, that is the communication system, the telecommunication system, was also introduced during the time of Dalhousie. He introduced this. He passed laws to ban child marriage and advocate widow remarriage. So there were two more things which he put into the society, that is the ban on child marriage. He passed this law. So child marriages were banned during the time of Lord Dalhousie. Well, you will be learning more about this in the upcoming lectures. How did child marriage got banned? But it was during his time he passed these laws, when Raja Ram Mohan Roy and some other social workers approached to him and requested him and made him realize it was a menace in the society. Well, and advocate widow remarriage. English education spread in India. This was another change that he brought about. He made the people of India literate with the English language. So English education was spread in India during his time. English was being taught to the people of India in the country during his time. The first three universities in India were established in Mumbai, Chennai and Kolkata in the year 1857. This is also one of the most important dates that one needs to remember. So remember, it's already underlined for you. Whenever there is an underlining or a highlighted bold, you should read that particular part especially, so that it's very well understood and remembered by you. At time of writing your answers, it will be required, or in MCQs or in fill in the blanks, it will be very helpful to you. Well, thus these reforms, well, reforms mean reformation, making changes bringing about a number of changes in the administration of the countries called reforms, were basically for the expansion of the British rule and in the ease of administration, ease in administration. It was not for any benefit of Indian. So Indians were not going to get benefited by that. It was only for keeping in mind the intention that the British administration should become smooth. Although Indians benefited later on, yes, when the British left, or even during the time of British, when passenger trains were there, the British were benefited a lot by that. So when people started the freedom movements, what happened? Leaders who were residing in different parts of the country were able to meet each other because of mass transportations. Well, details you'll be learning in the upcoming chapters. Although Indians benefited later on, they had to suffer a lot with the introduction of the British reforms. Because of the British reforms, they suffered a lot too. It was not that they only benefited, they suffered a lot too. Well, in the next think question or think section you've been given, the British established their rule almost all over India in a very short time period with the policy of subsidiary alliance. So, subsidiary alliance policy made or played a key role in spreading the British Empire all over the country. If Wellesley had not introduced the subsidiary alliance, maybe the Britishers would not have captured majority of the states in India. So it was subsidiary alliance and the policy of annexation which helped them to establish their rule. Well, how did this happen? You get a book published in England with details of victory of the British in 1857. What will be your feedback or response after reading it? So you've been given open-ended question. If you happen to get a book which says the bravery of the England people of England, their victory, how did they have victory in India, what would be your reaction? Imagine about it, think about it. It's an open-ended question. Well, so this was the information about the reformations and the expansion of the British Empire by the help of the Dalhousie's policy of annexation, after what we learnt about the subsidiary alliance policy in the last lecture and in the recapitulation as well. The next thing that we need to look into is point number 4.5 given to you on page number 36 about the dissatisfaction of people. Well, what is this dissatisfaction? Why were they dissatisfied? Well, naturally people would be dissatisfied because they did not want the British rule. Well, at that time, as we already understood, that India was not governed by any parliamentary body or a government was there. We did not have any democratic system over here, isn't it? We had individual rulers ruling in different parts of the country. So we can say each part was like a country itself, isn't it? Every state, every ruler would be having his or their own rules and regulations to be followed with these subjects. So the subjects lived a common life under the leadership or under the guidance of that particular ruler. So there was nothing as one India, or oneness was not there. That the people living in Punjab would have got nothing to do with the people living in the south or Mysore, isn't it? Perhaps they would have never even visited those places. So there was nothing like one whole India. Pre-independence or in the 15th or 16th century, what we are talking about. Therefore, Britishers now dominating almost all the parts of the country. Therefore, we can say the Britishers had now put their control over the entire country. So, whatever rules, regulations, norms were laid down by the Britishers, the reformations that they brought about were to be obeyed and abided by the subjects, the common people. But the people did not like this, and therefore a sense of dissatisfaction arose in the people. So we are going to read about this dissatisfaction. So let's read. After the policy of subsidiary alliance, Dalhousie's policy of annexation shook the whole nation. The entire nation was taken aback. The whole nation was shook. What happened? What is this? What is happening to our country? So this resulted in the dissatisfaction among the people towards the British. The Britishers were not liked by the Indian subjects. Well, naturally, the people who were living in a particular ruler's rule, his kingdom, would be liking the king. But here, who was the new king now? The Britishers were the new king now. So they did not like their king, that is, the Britishers, who were making so much atrocities on his subjects. Well, an example has been given. You must have seen the film Kranti and Mangal Pandey. If you have not seen, then try to see. Well, you must have seen, I'm quite sure about it. So you can see it. You will find similar atrocities being done by the Britishers on the Indian people. Well, at this time, the people were suppressed under the dictatorial regime of the British. They were become dictators now, isn't it? They were dictating terms, just like Hitler. Whatever they said should happen, should be done, isn't it? So they were dictating, they were taking taxes from them, lagans from them forcibly. Whether they had or not, they had to give it. They used to punish them like anything. Their condition was pathetic. Well, so at this time, the people were suppressed. They were brought under control, the British control, and under the dictatorial regime, that is reign. Regime means reign of the British. In addition to that, the reforms made by Dalhousie added fuel to fire. Now already the Britishers were making a lot of atrocities on the people by forcing them to pay taxes, and many more things were going on. At that given point of time, the new reforms that came, that is the ban of the child marriage, remarriage of the widows. Now this, sentimentally, the people got hurt, isn't it? At that given point of time, people did not accept it. The class, the people who were living, they thought that they are now forcing us to, or they are making changes in our religion also, in our religious beliefs and the rituals what they used to do, isn't it? Widow never used to remarriage at that time, but widow remarriage was being promoted at that time, and child marriage was being banned and not allowed. So such new reforms people did not accept readily, and they thought it was not good for them. Well, the reforms added fuel to the fire. It plays a role like this. Different people reacted differently. So it was not that everyone who was residing in India had the same reaction. Well, there were people who thought it was a benefit to them. So different people reacted differently to railways, facilities of post and telegraph, and Western education. So people had individual ideologies, individual thinkings to these reformations that came about. The post, the telegram, that is the railways and other facilities that were given to the people by the British. Well, but there were classes of orthodox minded people. Orthodox means those who are old, traditional, old minded people, those who do not come out of their thoughts. So orthodox people felt that the British wanted to destroy the culture. That was the thinking, that they are such people, those who want to destroy the Indian culture, the way the Indians live. And that is why they are doing all these things, isn't it? Introducing of the railways and all this was not taken as a positive vibe, it was taken as a negative thing. Who did this? The orthodox minded people. So the orthodox people felt that the British wanted to destroy their culture and set in their British culture over here. Well, the reforms done by the British were basically for running the administration smoothly. That was the basic need why they were doing it. Whether the postal department was open, the railways, the other reforms that they brought about, whether it's a child marriage. So it was only for the smooth administration of the state and administration of the British Empire. Well, the dissatisfaction of the people had reached a point of saturation to the greatest heights. People were completely dissatisfied. They were not ready to accept what the Britishers were doing with them. And they were in a state of rebellion. They were in a state of revolt. They were literally going to revolt against them now. So we can say it's called rebellion. They would be acting against, they would be discontinuing to obey. They would not be obeying them. They would not obey them anymore. Therefore, which resulted in the freedom movement of 1857, and that ignited the spark amongst the people. That is the main reason. Dissatisfaction was the main reason. The reforms that came about. That is why the people started revolting against the British rule. They did not like the Britishers, and finally the freedom movement of 1857 ignited, and you will be having a chapter about this as well to read. So I hope you understood about the three things that we tried to cover today. That is the expansion policy of the British rule in India, that is 4.3, Dalhousie's policy of annexation, and finally the dissatisfaction that led to the freedom struggle or the freedom movement of 1857 in our country. Well, this was all for today's lecture, and for the chapter that we learnt, you have the multiple choice given to you and followed by the fill in the blanks, the match the following, and the question answers. Well, in today's homework you will be writing the short note about the annexation policy of Dalhousie on page number 41. Annexation policy about Dalhousie, so note it down, and you will be writing what reforms were made by Dalhousie in India. So 2 questions you will be writing as a part of homework and submitting, that is question number 3 and question number 4 respectively on page 41 and 42. So note it down. I hope you noted down the homework. See you soon in the upcoming lecture. Till then, take care. Have a nice day and goodbye.